Life has a funny way of reminding us just how fragile we are. The years seem to fly by, don't they? And sooner or later, we all have to face the fact that our time here is, well, it's temporary. Today we're going to dive into a really ancient text that hits this feeling head-on, Psalm 90. It's this profound look at how short life is, what it all means, and where we're supposed to find hope in the middle of it. So let's get into it.
But hey, before we get all ancient, let's start with something personal. I want you to think about this. If you could go back and give your younger self just one piece of advice, what would you say? I bet for a lot of us it'd be something like, don't sweat the small stuff, right? Or focus on what actually matters. And that tension, that feeling of having limited time but wanting to live wisely, that's exactly what this psalm is all about.
So who's behind this incredible piece of poetry? Well, the source material tells us it's the one and only psalm written by Moses. And that's a huge deal. Think about it. Moses saw an entire generation of his people die, over 40 years in the wilderness, all as a consequence of their rebellion. Can you imagine the weight of that? This psalm, it comes from that place of deep, heavy loss and a perspective that was earned the hard way.
Now, to help us make sense of our short, temporary lives, Moses does something brilliant. He starts somewhere completely different. He paints this incredible, stark contrast between God, who is eternal, and us humans who are not. And getting a grip on this contrast, that's the key to unlocking the whole psalm. So before he even whispers a word about human weakness or suffering, Moses starts with God. And this is so important. The source points out that how we see our lives is totally shaped by how we see God. See, if we start with our own problems, we just get discouraged. But if we start with God, that gives us the right perspective for everything else. So what does eternal even mean? Well, Moses breaks it down into these 4 incredible ideas. First, God has no beginning. He was around before the mountains were even a thing. Second, he has no end. He is, as the psalmist says, from everlasting to everlasting. Third, he's the Lord over time itself. 1,000 years for us, it's like a single day to him. And because of all that, he is unchanging. Everything in our world fades, but his character, his promises, they stay the same. Okay, so after laying that solid, eternal foundation, Moses just pivots. It's like he holds up a mirror to us, to humanity, and what we see is this jarring, total contrast. If God is permanent, our lives are anything but.
And he uses these 3 really vivid metaphors to just drive the point home. Our lives, they're like a flash flood, powerful for a second, and then just gone. Or they're like a dream that vanishes the moment you open your eyes. And maybe the most famous one, we're like grass that's green and alive in the morning, but by sunset, it's dry and withered. Now, this isn't supposed to be depressing. It's just supposed to be real.
So that leads to the big question, why? If life is this fleeting, why is that? The psalm doesn't just describe our condition. It actually gives a theological diagnosis for why our lives are so fragile and, let's be honest, often so full of hardship.
And here's the argument laid out in the source. It starts with human rebellion, sin, entering the world. This wasn't some tiny mistake. It introduced brokenness and decay into every corner of creation. And the final, ultimate consequence of that rebellion? Death itself. So mortality isn't framed as just a biological accident, but as the direct result of this broken relationship with God.
This quote really shows how seriously the source takes this. The psalmist says that even our secret sins, the ones we think nobody sees, they're laid out in the open before God. It's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? That nothing is actually hidden. And that means every little action and motive really matters. And that brings us to this idea of God's justice, or what the psalm calls his wrath. Now, it is so easy to get the wrong idea here. The source is quick to clarify that this isn't about some out-of-control flying rage. It's presented as the righteous and necessary response of a perfectly holy God to evil. I mean, think about it. If God just looked the other way at injustice, would he really be good?
Okay, I know. So far, this has been pretty heavy stuff. Life is short, sin is serious, justice is real. But right in the middle of this psalm, there's a huge shift. The whole tone pivots away from this difficult diagnosis and turns into this beautiful, heartfelt prayer for wisdom and for hope.
And this line right here, this is the absolute heart of the psalm. Teach us to number our days. Now, this isn't about being morbid and counting down the days till we die, not at all. It's about living with this keen awareness that our time is limited so that we can pour our energy into what truly matters. It's a prayer for an eternal perspective right here and now.
So where does that wisdom point us? Well, Moses prays, "Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love." That Hebrew word he uses is hesed, and it's such a powerful word. It's not just love, it's a loyal, faithful, never giving up, covenant kind of love. And the argument here is that this is the only thing that can ever truly, deeply satisfy the human heart.
This chart really spells it out, doesn't it? We spend so much of our short lives chasing satisfaction. We look for it in our achievements, in our possessions, but the psalm argues that's all temporary. It can't deliver real, lasting joy. The only source of fulfillment that's presented as eternal, as unshakable, is this chesed, this steadfast love from God.
All right, so after all that, our fragile lives on one side, God's eternal nature on the other, how are we actually supposed to live? The psalm doesn't just leave us hanging there. It wraps up with two really clear, practical takeaways that flow right out of all this wisdom.
So here it is, the blueprint. First, live for what lasts. If our time is the most precious thing we have, this non-renewable resource, then we should invest in things that have eternal significance. Things like loving God and loving other people. And second, hold on to hope. The psalmist starts by calling God our dwelling place, our home. It's a powerful reminder that our real security isn't found in our circumstances, but in the unchanging character of God.
And that brings us right to the core message of the whole thing. Yes, life is incredibly short. And yeah, the problem of sin is presented as deeply serious. But the final word of the psalm is not despair, not even close. The ultimate takeaway is that God's mercy, His hesed, His grace, is even greater than all of it.
So the psalm doesn't end by looking at death. It ends with this powerful prayer for purpose. It's asking God to take our short lives, our everyday work, and give it lasting meaning. It's a prayer that our temporary efforts would somehow be blessed and woven into His eternal story. I mean, it's a 3,000-year-old invitation to live a short life with a really, really long view. So, what work of your hands do you hope will last?